This week we're actually going to start at the beginning in chapter 1. So if you've got the Bible, if you could find the book of Daniel, and we're going to see how a small group of young men who've had their worlds turned completely upside down have to fight to remain faithful to God and to keep their consciences clean. Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, and they were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among these were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief officials gave them new names. To Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now, we don't know exactly what the issue was here. It's an obvious instinct to think, well, it must be to do with the laws around kosher, around what you can and can't eat as a Jew. But actually, that doesn't explain the wine. There's absolutely no problem under kosher laws with drinking wine. So some people think that it's similar to the issue that we saw not so long ago in 1 Corinthians about eating and drinking things which have been sacrificed to idols. Some people think that it's just that they don't want to assimilate fully, and this is the only point in which they can reasonably stand a chance of protesting and resisting. They're both plausible options. But what is clear, defile is a very strong word. This is a matter of conscience for Daniel and for his friends. It's not something unimportant, something trivial. And there are times, aren't there, when the culture that we're surrounded by or the context that we find ourselves in asks us to do things that we're not comfortable with. We think that is going to wound my conscience. It's inherent in being a disciple of Jesus, because we are in the world, but not of the world. So there are expectations which we're not comfortable with, and we're sometimes forced to take costly decisions. I'm sure I'm not the only person here, for example, who has been asked on occasion by a boss to lie. For some people, perhaps, especially in Spain, the tricky issues come around maintaining a second set of books. An Indian brother once told me about his experiences living in India, committed to not bribing officials at any point. And how difficult it was, but at the same time how God came through in marvellous ways for him. So when you're faced with a question of conscience like this, what do you do? What did Daniel do? Let's keep on reading. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now, God had caused the official to show favour and sympathy to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, "I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." Daniel then said to the guards whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink." Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. The first thing he does, he asks for an official exemption. Denied. And actually the reply that the chief official gives him seems to me to be a masterpiece of diplomacy. Because if you think about it, what Daniel's really asking for is official permission to insult the king. If you invite me round to your house for dinner and you cook something special and then you bring it out to me and I leave it all on the plate and pull a sandwich out of my pocket, you're going to be offended, aren't you? By offering them food from his own table, the king is doing a great honour to all of these students. And so to say, "No thanks," is offensive. And it's dangerous, obviously, for the official to say, "Yeah, sure, go ahead, insult the king, no problem." So of course he doesn't approve. What does Daniel do then? Now, lots of parents will be familiar with this strategy. Those whose children are too young will probably encounter it at some point in the future. The first time that it occurs to a child, "Well, Daddy said no, but maybe if I ask Mummy, she'll say yes," that child probably thinks that they're really, really clever. If there are any children watching this on YouTube, don't try it, because your parents will find out. And they will see it as disrespecting the one who said no, and they will punish you. So you have been warned. But Daniel does do this. And the second person he asks, the guard who's been placed over them, goes ahead with it. Now, note, he does ask something slightly different. He asks for a trial period. And also note that the incentives are slightly different. The chief of the officials probably ate at the table of the king. The guard probably didn't. The original request without the trial period, rather more open-ended. With the trial period, 10 days at the start of 3 years. Well, if it doesn't work, if the trial's abandoned, then no one's going to see the difference at the end of all that time. But ask yourself as well, if Daniel and his friends are eating salad and drinking water, who's eating all of the really nice stuff and drinking the expensive wine that comes from the king's table? I rather suspect that this guard went from eating meat once a week as a special event to eating meat every day. So in effect, what we're doing here is we're bribing the guard to go along with it. So what lessons should we take from Daniel's conduct? We have to recognize that the heroes of the faith, with the sole exception of Jesus Christ, are imperfect, fallen human beings. And the Bible shows us their triumphs, but a lot of the time it also shows us their failures. So we should take what Paul says to the Thessalonians about testing everything, hanging on to the good, rejecting the bad, as applying also to the examples of the heroes of the faith that we read about in the Bible, and more recent heroes of the faith as well. We shouldn't draw the conclusion that it's fine to bribe officials. But when we find that we're struggling, we're put under pressure to compromise our principles and to stain our consciences, we can look to the example of Daniel and also to the verse in Corinthians which says that God always provides a way out when we're tempted. And we can say, God, what is that way out? We don't have to just accept that, okay, we must compromise, we must feel remorse, we must have a stained conscience. There is a way out if we look for it. And we can also take an example from Daniel's humility. He addresses the officials with a lot of humility. He talks to the guard, who's not the highest ranking person around, and addresses him, says, "We are your servants." He asks permission rather than going in full confrontation. Now, sometimes a confrontational response does actually achieve the desired effect. I recall an anecdote I heard once about the personal secretary to a high-up businessman who, when he was asked to lie for his boss, said directly no, and then followed that up with, "Bear in mind, if I lie for you, I can also lie to you." But sometimes the direct confrontation like that isn't the best approach. There's truth in the saying that you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. So Daniel speaks with respect and humility. A lot of the way, that's also the best approach to address demands on us which we're not comfortable with. I'm not comfortable with that, rather than straight no. And we see that God honours Daniel's desire to maintain his integrity, and we can trust that he will honour our desire to maintain our integrity. Jesus promised that being his disciple would have a cost. If you're his disciple, you don't belong to the world. You enter into a culture clash, even if you're still living in the town where you were born. So, why follow Christ? Because we, like Daniel, are imperfect. None of us has a completely clean conscience, or if we do, that just shows how damaged it has been. Jesus offers us reconciliation with the perfect God who cannot accept imperfect people. So if you haven't received that reconciliation, we'd be delighted to talk with you and pray with you afterwards. If you have received it, then stay faithful to God even in the difficult times. Look for his way out when you're tempted. And learn from Daniel that sometimes humility is more effective than a confrontational attitude.